I have now the pleasure to welcome Cathrin Brisken, professor at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne and at the Institute of Cancer Research in London. So Cathrin is also the coordinator of one of our Marie Curie ITN project. She will close our session this morning by giving us an overview of the current challenges and opportunities in cancer prevention. Please, Cathrin.
Thank you very much, Marc, and I'm very happy and honored to have the opportunity to present here today and share with you my thoughts of what the challenges and opportunities are in cancer prevention. If I can have the next slide, please. So in the cancer researcher community, the molecular biologists, they think of cancer prevention as something having to do with healthy eating, with smoking and UV light, and this kind of meeting that they will never attend. And if we go on, which is why, please, next slide. In fact, cancer prevention goes beyond the lifestyle issues. It was already mentioned, and I'm very impressed with the ambitious plans of the EU Commission. Vaccinations against viruses that cause cancer are included. And then there is secondary prevention, which is the identification and the removal of high-risk lesions. And it even includes tertiary cancer prevention, which aims at preventing the recurrence of the disease after a primary cancer has been removed. Next slide. Now, why do we care about cancer prevention? Well, we are kind of up against the wall. I'm showing you here numbers of the global cancer burden. And these are the estimates of the number of all new cases in 2020, which are 19.3 million. And in only 20 years from now, the estimation is that worldwide there will be 30.2 million cases. Next slide. And if we look at where this happens, it's all over the globe. And of note, look at the African continent. So we have a similar increase in number, but proportionately, it hits much harder on underdeveloped regions. And if I can have the next slide. In this map of the world, you see that Europe, that is in dark blue, is doing really well in terms of what is attributable in terms of premature mortality to cancer. So Europe has made great progress on turning cancer, a deadly disease, into a chronic disease. But then take a look at the African continent and other regions that are in dark red. So here being diagnosed with cancer still means very high chances of dying from it. Now, in the next slide, shows you data from 2008, and already then actually the number of deaths attributable to cancer in developing countries had outgrown the numbers attributable to infectious disease. On the right of the scheme, you see the funding that has been flowing into the developing countries from the different governments and NGOs. And the vast majority of that has gone into the treatment of infectious disease, and just a tiny little portion that you see in orange went into tackling the problem of cancer. And more than 90% of that money went into campaigning against tobacco. So the problem is not being tackled. If I can have the next slide, please. And at the same time, as we see an increase in numbers in the developing countries, we face another issue here that's illustrated in the graph which shows you the average, the median cost of monthly cancer treatment with drugs that have just been approved by new cancer drugs just approved by the FDA. And so in 1970, that was $100 per month for a cancer treatment with a new cancer drug. Just 20 years later, in 1990, we were at $1,000 for a month of cancer treatment. And in 2010, we are at 10,000, and the trend is increasing. And next slide, please. And so we're seeing an exponential increase in the cost for cancer treatment, while the anticipation, the investment into research, the preventing of cancer has been much less substantial. So you see data there on the bottom left from the US, from the NIH, where you see of the total budget spent on cancer, 4% went into, strictly speaking, prevention. There's another chunk of 15% for early detection and diagnosis. And in the EU, we just did slightly better with 22% of the funding dedicated to prevention, early detection and diagnosis. Next slide, please. So that's the first big challenge. And the problem is that we are looking here at long-term goals with no immediate return. And so it's very difficult to get the private sector involved, which means that in this area, we need more public funding and more support from NGOs. Now, that also provides an opportunity because it means that the research will be more independent and we can probably build more trust. And we will reinforce the relationship between science and politics, which I will come back to later, I think is very important. Now, one should also see cancer prevention as a development aid, because in preventing cancer better, a lot of education needs to go into that effort. And cancer is a disease that if you want to treat it properly, it requires an awful lot of infrastructure. And then there are just really low-hanging fruits. In several African countries, you have very few pathologists. And with little means, now that we zoom all around the world, we can very concretely help there with digital pathology and other means. Next slide, please. So here I'm showing you the cancer incidence as it evolved in the United Kingdom from 1993 to 2017 for several different cancer types. And you see in red the numbers for women and in the light blue for men, and then the purple color, the average. And I see I lost some labels there. I'm sorry about that. So on the top left, what you see is the dropping curves shows you the incidence of stomach cancer. And here we can clap ourselves on the shoulders because this is really a success of science and technology. So one important factor is that now we can freeze food and don't need to fume it anymore to preserve it. And the other is the realization that a bacterium is responsible for inflammation of the stomach, Helicobacter pylori, which is responsible for gastritis. And that can be treated with antibiotics. And that brought down dramatically the incidence of stomach cancer. The other thing you can notice is, and I have on the top the breast, the prostate, and then there is thyroid cancer in the bottom left, and pancreatic cancer is in the bottom, in the lower part, in the middle. And so all these cancers are on the increase, and they are all arising in so-called hormone-sensitive tissues. And another thing I would like you to notice is that in most cancer types, men are more strongly affected. They're more frequent in men, with the exception of thyroid cancer, where that's the other way around. And also we observe that outcome is very different between men and women. So again, there are hormones playing a role in the genesis of the disease. And now, can I have the next slide? So from this, I think we can learn an awful lot from well-collected data, and I see an enormous opportunity there in helping us understand why people get cancer. We now have unprecedented opportunities to collect data, and it's very important that this be done by public entities so people can trust and grant access. And that it be properly annotated and made available, as it is on the beautiful site there from Cancer Research UK, and as I hear you're making efforts. And next slide, please. And so we've set up this network, and you see that among our partners on the top, there is a preponderance of participants from Scandinavian countries, where indeed data collection is very advanced, and the rest of us in Europe can learn a lot from these countries. And the network also has brought in 2 mathematicians so that we can train very data savvy future cancer prevention experts. And the next slide, please. And so the network tackles 2 different tumor types, breast cancer and skin cancer, and will look at the role of sex hormone signaling and inflammation, and aims to translate that into new preventive strategies. And the next slide, please. And so here, this is my personal research interest, that is breast cancer, that I would like to illustrate a third point, which is a disease that unfortunately affects 1 in 8 women. And in addition to a family predisposition, we know that the risk of women to get breast cancer is linked to hormone exposures. And these can be endogenous, so the reproductive history of women has an impact on their breast cancer risk, or these can be exogenous hormone exposures, such as through hormonal contraception, hormone replacement therapy, and then environmental through endocrine disruptors. And if I can have the next slide, please. And so I'm showing you here a substance called bisphenol A that we have studied in the past, which is very important in that it has a very big production volume. The projected production is 7,350,000 tons by the end of 2023, and it's found in all sorts of consumer products. So we are all exposed to it, and in fact, you can measure it in different body fluids of 90% of the population. And so we were recruited to a network that examined whether it could be linked to breast cancer. And you cannot answer that question really, because everybody is exposed. There's no more control group. However, and the next slide, please. In doing experiments with mice, we ended up showing and contributing to a large body of evidence that environmentally relevant exposures already in utero alter subtly development and which render the breast more susceptible to breast cancer later in life. It alters the epigenetics, and we now know that this can be transmitted to a number of generations, these effects. And so one is very concerned about these issues. So if I can have the next slide, please. And I think that is a very big challenge. How do we communicate our knowledge and insights with the public and with policymakers? We need to build trust. We need to have provide open access and annotate well the different results. And it's important to involve many stakeholders. And I think that is very important for designing programs and setting the perspectives. When it comes to regulation, I think, however, the regulators should be at the table only with the scientists and not have industry present. And the next slide, please. So we're very fortunate to have the Cancer Pref ITN network as a forum to start building a network and develop better communication. And there's also, we founded a foundation because these aims go beyond the network and will take longer to develop. And with that, if I can have the last slide, I would like to thank you for your attention and invite you all to attend our first workshop of the Cancer Pref ITN, which looks at sexual dimorphism in cancer and takes place next week.
Thank you very much, Cathrin, for this very interesting presentation.